Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
You're listening to the sweet sounds of Nerdery and Murdery.
You're an idiot. Welcome to episode 82 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 82. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week's of the highs and the lows, the ups and the downs, the nerds and the merds. And Zig, why don't you take over for another nerdery subject?
Yes, this subject is quite nerdery. We are discussing Star Trek Voyager.
And I love Star Trek Voyager, and you don't.
No, I do not. It's okay. It's okay. It's still Star Trek. I mean, it's still better than NCIS. You know.
Well, and there's going to be people that are going to disagree with you on that.
Oh yeah.
But you know, I went back and I had to watch the entire series a few years ago because of the Star Trek Online role-playing game. There was a lot of content that went into or the Star Trek Online game. There was a lot of content that came from Voyager, so I was like, you know what, I need to go back and I need to watch it. And so I watched it in its entirety, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed Voyager.
I have tried recently to go back and watch it. I did find some real gems, and I'll talk about the two that I thought were just really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I felt like the writing wasn't there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great, but I thought there were some good storylines in it. Overall, I enjoy Voyager.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's not my favorite Star Trek, but it's still Star Trek. So,
right.
You know. Star Trek Voyager is an American science fiction television series created by Rick Berman, Michael Piller, and Jerry Taylor. It originally aired from January 16th, 1995 to May 23rd, 2001 on UPN, lasting for 172 episodes.
Yep.
7 seasons. It is the 5th series in the Star Trek franchise, set in the 24th century when Earth is part of the United Federation of Planets. It follows the adventures of Starfleet vessel USS Voyager as it attempts to return home to the Alpha Quadrant after being stranded in the Delta Quadrant on the far side of the Milky Way galaxy. Paramount Pictures commissioned the series following the termination of Star Trek Next Generations to accompany the ongoing Star Trek Deep Space Nine series. So the idea was we've got one series that's exploring strange new worlds and seeking out new life and new civilizations, and another one that is set on the space station that is trying to maintain peace and order in our section of the galaxy. Which was, I will say that's actually a pretty good idea. That two-pronged strategy's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
The complex relationship between Starfleet and ex-Federation colonists known as the Maquis was one of the elements that persisted as a central theme in Voyager. It was the first Star Trek series to feature a female commanding officer.
Yep.
Catherine Janeway, played by Kate Mulgrew. Originally was going to be played by a different actress.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yvette Bijou. She's a French actress. But they filmed the pilot and they watched it and they didn't like it. So they hired Kate Mulgrew. She came in, they reshot the pilot. There are a couple of scenes where in the pilot where Janeway's hand goes to a control console and starts touching it. That's not Janeway's hand. That's not Kate Mulgrew's hand.
Huh.
That's the only part that lady is still in. But yeah, they didn't care for her.
Well, and Captain Janeway grows throughout the series as well. She's very, very rigid and very stoic.
Yeah.
Throughout, but she her character grows as the series went on.
Yeah. Rick Berman served as the head executive producer.
Mm-hmm.
In charge of overall production. But he was assisted by a series of executive producers, Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor, Brendan Braga, and Kenneth Biller. All of which went on to have careers with not just Star Trek, but other shows as well. It is set in a different part of the galaxy. Voyager gave the series writers space to introduce new alien species and recurring characters, namely the Kazons, the Vidians, the Hyrogen, species 8472, which is a number I can never remember, and during the later seasons, and the Borg as a species created for Next Generation were introduced as the main antagonists. During Voyager's run, various episode novelizations and tie-in video games were produced, and after it ended, various novels continued the series.
Yep.
So a little on the production side. So as Star Trek The Next Generation ended, Paramount Pictures wanted to continue to have two Star Trek series on at the same time. And the studio also planned to start a new television network. There's some interesting plays about how UPN came about. The reason we got UPN and WB roughly at the same time, we had UPN and then a year later we got WB, was because both of those entities were working together to start a television network and they couldn't agree on certain things. But they eventually started two separate television networks, which is why you've got Babylon 5 on one and Star Trek Deep Space Nine on the other. When I go to do the Babylon 5 episode, which I'm going to do on episode 110 because that's how many episodes of Babylon 5 there were, because I'm a nerd. I'll kind of expand on that because the story on how those two things came about was very interesting. But Paramount earlier planned to launch a network to showcase Star Trek Phase 2 in 1977, but that kind of fell through. Initial work on Star Trek Voyager began in 1993 with the 7th and final season of Star Trek The Next Generation and the 2nd season of Deep Space Nine were in production. Seeds for Voyager's backstory, including the development of the Maquis, were placed in several of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine episodes. And Voyagers were shot on stages the Next Generation had used and where the Voyager pilot Caretaker was shot in September 1994. Costume designer Robert Blackman decided that the uniform of the Voyager's crew would be the same as those on Deep Space Nine. The Star Trek Voyager was the first Star Trek series to use computer-generated imagery rather than models for exterior space shots. Babylon 5 and Sequest DSV had previously used CGI to avoid the expensive models, but the Star Trek television department continued using models because they felt they were more realistic. Amblin Imaging won an Emmy Award for Voyager's opening CGI titled visuals, but the weekly episode exteriors were captured with hand-built miniatures of Voyager. Now, I will say this about Voyager. Of all the Star Trek series, it has the best opening.
Mm-hmm.
It runs a little long, but there's a reason for that. It's because they wanted to showcase some of those great effects that they were doing. And the song is good. It is beautiful, kind of uplifting. And but if for nothing else, if you never watch any Voyager, watch the opening. I've included it on the YouTube playlist for this episode, so you can see the opening titles and some various scenes from other episodes. They also built models for the shuttlecraft and the other ships, but that changed when Voyager went fully CGI for certain types of shots midway through season 3. Foundation Imaging was the studio responsible for special effects during Babylon 5's first 3 seasons and season 3 of The Swarm. It was the first episode to use Foundation's effects exclusively. Star Trek Deep Space Nine began using Foundation Imaging in conjunction with Digital Muse in season 6. And in its later season, Voyager featured visual effects from Foundation Imaging and Digital Muse, almost exclusively. The digital effects were produced at standard television resolution. Some have speculated that it cannot be released in HD format without recreating some of the special effects. But the next series, Enterprise, had been released in HD, but the special effects were rendered in 480p and upscaled. So we may not get a whole bunch of the Voyager in 4K Ultra for a while because they have to really play with some of those special effects, so they don't look dingy.
Yeah.
But I wanted to center on a couple of key characters that I think were interesting, at least to me. I want to talk about Kes, who was my favorite character in the series. And I was a big fan on the first season. I watched it religiously. I'd go over to Don's house and we watch it together. We watched that and Nowhere Man. But Kes was a fictional character on the American science fiction television show Star Trek Voyager. She was portrayed by actress Jennifer Lean. So Kes is an Okampa. They're a telepathic alien species with an average life expectancy of 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first meet Kes, she's like 2 years old, but she's an adult. She's a young woman. But in the next season, Kes looks like she's aged 5 years because that's what happens to her people. I thought it was a brilliant idea, and I really wish they'd have kept her on. But apparently, they were looking to gin up the numbers for DS9, so they got rid of Kes and got 709. Or I'm not DS9. I'm sorry, Voyager. Kes was in the premiere episode, she was with her Talaxian boyfriend, Neelix, and she subsequently works as the Doctor's medical assistant and developed her mental abilities with the Vulcan second-in-command, Tuvok. Kes's storyline focused on her relationships with Neelix, the Doctor, Tuvok, Tom Paris, and Catherine Janeway. Her psionic powers were also central in secondary themes of some episodes. Lean was removed from the series in the 4th season, but reprised her role in season 6 episode Fury. Kes has been featured in non-canonical novels and short stories adapted for the show. I did go back and watch Fury. I was not real happy with how they ended Kes, but at least it was an ending. Critical response to Kes was mostly negative, though some critics praised Lean's performance. Although Kes's relationship with Neelix was panned, critics have more mixed reaction to her friendships with Tuvok and Tom Paris. Kes's relationships with members of Voyager's crew and her psionic powers attracted attention from academics. In the pilot episode, Caretaker, USS Voyager, departs from Deep Space Nine space station on a mission to the treacherous Badlands. They're searching for missing ships piloted by a team of Maquis rebels, which Voyager security officer, the Vulcan Lieutenant Tuvok, has secretly infiltrated. While in the Badlands, Voyager is enveloped by a powerful energy wave that kills several of its crew, damages the ship, and strands it in the galaxy's Delta Quadrant. This is how the series opens, and we're quickly introduced to Neelix and Kes. The Caretaker is responsible for continuing care of the Ocampa, a race of aliens native to the Delta Quadrant, and has been abducting other species from around the galaxy in an effort to find a successor because the Caretaker is dying. Voyager and the Maquis ship, which eventually joined forces, are basically taken out of where they are in the Badlands and transported 70,000 light years away. The Caretaker space station is destroyed in a pitched space battle with another local alien species, the Kazon. Chakotay, leader of the Maquis group, becomes Voyager's first officer. B'Elanna Torres, a half-human, half-Klingon Maquis, becomes chief engineer. Tom Paris, who Janeway releases from a Federation prison to help find the Maquis ship, is made Voyager's helm officer. Due to the ship's entire medical staff, the Doctor, an emergency medical hologram designed only for short-term use, is employed as the ship's full-time chief medical officer.
Right, because the entire medical crew died.
Yeah, they killed off most of the crew in the first episode.
Yes,
which is why I thought, oh my God, this show is going to be great. And it didn't hook me after that. Like I said, I liked the first season pretty good. There were some great episodes, but due to its great distance from Federation space, the Delta Quadrant is unexplored by Starfleet, and Voyager is truly going where no one has gone before. And as they set out on their projected 75-year journey home, the crew passes through regions belonging to various species. The barbaric and belligerent Kazons, the organ-harvesting, disease-ravaged Vidians, the nomadic hunter race, the Hyrogen, the fearsome species 8472 from fluidic space, and most notably the Borg, whose home is in the Delta Quadrant. So the Voyager has to move through large areas of Borg-controlled space in later seasons. They also encounter perilous natural phenomenon, a nebulous area called the Nacrete Expanse, a large area of empty space called the Void, wormholes and dangerous nebulae and other anomalies.
And the Void is from the episode Night, which is a great episode.
Yes, Night is a good episode. I will give you that. Voyager is also the third Star Trek series to feature Q. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Q.
I love Q. He gets annoying, but I still love the character of Q.
Yeah, well, and I love John Delancey. I mean, they discover an ancient interstellar communication network that the Hyrogen have claimed, but they can tap. Their relay network is later disabled, but due to the efforts of Earth-based Lieutenant Reginald Barclay, Starfleet eventually establishes regular contact in the season 6 episode Pathfinder using a communications array and micro wormhole technology. So in the beginning, they can't get messages back and forth to the Alpha Quadrant.
Right.
And for the first 3 or 4 seasons, they don't know about the Dominion War. They don't know about the Borg trying to take over Earth. They don't know about a whole litany of things that are going on in the Alpha Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come to find out there is a episode where it's kind of heartbreaking for the Maquis because they find out they are the biggest Maquis. I think it's that episode Pathfinder, where they find out they are the last crew of Maquis left alive. And it's like, what happened? In the first 2 episodes, the show's 4th season, Kess leaves the ship in the wake of an extreme transformation of her mental abilities, while 7 of 9, known colloquially as Seven, a Borg drone who is assimilated as a 6-year-old human girl, is liberated from the collective and joins the Voyager crew. As the series progresses, Seven begins to regain her humanity with the ongoing help of Captain Janeway. You also get characters like Seska and Michael Jonas. They're uncovered fairly early on as being Seska is a Cardassian who had infiltrated the Maquis, and I think Michael Jonas is still very anti. Is he Section 33? I can't remember the Michael Jonas guy. Maybe he's just allied with Seska. But they do end up finding some help in the Delta Quadrant. They get them a little closer as things go on. And, Kess undergoes a radical evolutionary process following contact with a species known as species 8472. And Kess has to leave Voyager, but in doing so, she propels them 9,500 light years toward home and out of Borg space.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have, at that point, they still have a Borg drone on Voyager named Annika Hansen, or 7 of 9. Now, apparently, Annika's parents had gone into the Badlands to do some research and had got shunted over into the Delta Quadrant. But because they were Federation scientists, they were like, well, we'll just study the Delta Quadrant and get all this information, and eventually we'll get it back to the Federation. But they come into contact with the Borg and get assimilated. And Annika is assimilated when she's a little girl. Her full Borg designation was 7 of 9, tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01. But they eventually all learned that her name was Annika Hansen, but she is more comfortable with being called 7.
Mm-hmm.
And they take out her some of her implants where she can't communicate with the Borg, but she is still partially cybernetic because they can't take them all out because some of them are important to her bodily functions.
Yes. Yes, she still has to go into the little regeneration pods at night and everything like that.
They do explore some of her background, her earlier life as Annika Hansen before she was assimilated by the Borg. Particular episode, The Raven, which I found quite touching. I did go back and watch that one. I like that one a lot. 7 of 9 was played by Jerry Ryan, and she appears in the series Star Trek Picard.
Yep.
As a recurring character in the first season, and she's promoted to a series regular in the second season, and she's going to be in the third as well.
Third and final.
Yep. Now, following the 3rd season of Star Trek Voyager, the production team decided the main cast character of Kess was to be dropped from the show, and it was decided that Captain Janeway needed a contrasting character, so they picked 7 of 9. The character was there to provide a third-person view on human condition. Prior examples include Spock in Star Trek, Data in Star Trek The Next Generation, and Odo in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Plus, it was really interesting having a Borg on, and they played off on that. There was some really interesting interplay on some Borg episodes later on.
Well, and as time goes on throughout Voyager, they learn to adapt Borg technology to the Voyager that ends up helping them through the Delta Quadrant.
Yeah, and eventually getting them home.
Yes.
A couple of episodes I'd like to talk about specifically that I found were exceptional. One of them is the 37s. The 37s is the first episode of the second season of Star Trek Voyager. But due to different release schedules, it was also released as the final episode of the first season in other countries. August 28, 1995 on the UPN network. It was directed by James L. Conway, and it was written by producers Jerry Taylor and Brandon Braga. It was originally intended to be a two-part episode to bridge between the first and second seasons, but was subsequently rewritten to be a single part due to late changes with the final act of the episode. Special effect shots of the settler cities could not be completed, with which Braga and series creator Michael Pillar were unhappy. It was set in the 24th century, and it follows the adventures of Starfleet and the Marquis in the Delta Quadrant. The Voyager's crew discovers a group of humans, including Amelia Earhart, played by Sharon Lawrence, who were abducted from the Earth in 1937. The crew of Voyager follows an ancient SOS to a Class L planet whose atmospheric interference requires landing the ship to investigate. So they land Voyager on a planet.
Mm-hmm.
And they find these, they send out an away team to discover the source of the transmission, and it's a Lockheed Martin 10 Electra, Amelia Earhart's airplane, with an alien generator added to sustain the SOS. Joining Commander Chakotay's team, the crew finds a cryostasis chamber containing 8 humans preserved since the 1930s, including Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, played by David Graff. After resurrecting Noonan, Amelia and Noonan hold a handgun on the Voyager officers hostage, disbelieving their story and insisting on speaking to J. Edgar Hoover. They eventually get the guns away from them, and Janeway learns that this species, the Briori, had visited Earth in 1937 and abducted some 300 humans, bringing them to the Delta Quadrant to use as slaves. The humans later successfully rebelled against the Briori, who fled and never returned. 15 generations later, there are more than 100,000 humans living in 3 cities on the planet. The last 8 unrevived humans in cryostations were believed dead by the others, who came to revere the 37s as monuments of their ancestors. So they were kind of worshipped as folk or cultural heroes, not so much gods. They can't use the Briori technology to send them home because they don't have that much. They've had to develop their own civilization there. They are fairly advanced, basically because they had to be.
Mm-hmm.
But their ancestors had dismantled the alien ship. They do offer to accept any of the Voyager crew into their society. And then Janeway faces a crisis of conscience over whether she could condemn all of Voyager to a 70-year journey home to Earth. Yet if she chooses, her choice is presented to the crew, and only some decide to continue onward. The ship cannot be staffed by fewer than 100. Meanwhile, Earhart says that as much as she admires Voyager and yearns to learn more about it, she and the other 37s feel a stronger affinity to the people on the planet, and they will be staying. In the end, Janeway allows her crew to decide for themselves, and they all opt to stay on board of Voyager. The only part of that I don't like is I think more of them would have stayed on the planet. I think given that choice, it's like, okay, we can go back to Earth, especially some of the Maquis people. We can go back to Earth, and probably die on the way. Maybe our children will make it back. Or I could stay here in this really advanced city and learn how they have, developed this Briori technology.
Mm-hmm.
The other episode, that's about it for the 37s, other than, I think it's beautiful. It's well acted.
It's a good episode.
It is really, really good. I think it is beautiful. The other episode I want to talk about is Distant Origins. It's the 65th episode of Star Trek Voyager, the 23rd episode of the 3rd season. Voyager encounters an alien race, but runs afoul of their principles. The Voth are humanoid lizards, and the plot revolves around one particular scientist who's taken an interest in studying Voth origins. The Voth believe that they are from this one planet, and their society comes from that planet, and it's kind of religiously held as being the birthplace of their society. However, this one Voth scientist discovers that they are not from that planet. They are genetically engineered dinosaurs. They took what are they? Hornbilled dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
and basically the species evolved them and put them on this planet and left, presumably to study them. But the species is gone. Either they stopped studying them or they died out. Because it's been millions and millions of years. So there's a big interplay on what is true and what is not, and will this harm their society? And they are an advanced civilization, but the Prime Directive still applies, because the Voyager crew figures it out really quickly. It's like, holy crap, these guys are dinosaurs. But they also have the empirical knowledge of dinosaurs, which these people don't have, because they have nothing linking them back to that, because they were taken away from Earth and moved. They can study the genes of us and themselves and show that we do have a common lineage somewhere, but it's very far back. And it's about how the Voth could have been a help to the Voyager crew, but they decided not to, because of this heretical idea that the Voth came from someplace else other than their homeland. I thought that episode was brilliant, and the applications for the dinosaur heads were beautiful. The way that they designed their technology and their writing and everything else, they put a lot of thought into this episode, which is why I think I like it so much. But yeah, that about wraps it up for what I've got on Voyager. Again, I'm not a huge fan. I don't hate it. I still like it. It's still Star Trek. I just think that in some cases the writing could have been better. I think if the writing had been a little better, I would love this show. And in the cases where the writing was better, I do love this show. What do you think?
I love Voyager. I really do. I enjoyed everything about it. I enjoyed going back and watching the entire series. I think it's a fun series to go through. I think it's very interesting as they have to go through the Delta Quadrant without any help from the Federation.
Yeah, they're not getting any help at all.
They're on their own, and they've got to figure things out. And that's what I think is so interesting about the show is as they figure things out, they adopt different technologies from different races, including the Borg, and then including to get a Borg on board who becomes a main character.
Yep.
I love the evolution of the Doctor throughout the episodes, because the Doctor, as he becomes more aware and ceases less to be just a hologram emergency program and actually more of a sentient being. There's some parallels to Data.
Yeah.
With the Doctor, as he's their only medical talent, and he's got to teach some others how to do medical as well. He teaches Tom Paris, he teaches Kess, he teaches 7 of 9. I think Voyager is one that you should go back and watch. I think if you watch it in its entirety, it's great all the way up to the last episode.
Yeah, they kind of wrap things up pretty quick.
Yeah, the last episode is very forced.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's worth a watch. Like I said, I've watched the entire thing versus DS9, which I've hardly watched any of.
Yeah.
So, I enjoyed it. I enjoy Voyager, and I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I can go back and watch it, and it's not bad. It's but again, I think when the writing was on, yeah, that show was great. I just don't think they had I think DS9 got the best of the Star Trek writers, and I think that was the main difference. Like the all the good writers all went over to DS9, and the other guys were like, they got the TV writers.
Maybe.
But occasionally, the sun shines on a dog's ass every once in a while. Because they had such an interesting idea to start with, eventually they would stumble across an idea like the 37s, like Distant Origins, like the episode where it's 1,000 years in the future and this one species wakes up a copy of the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that episode was incredible too. I didn't want to go down too many rabbit holes.
No, I understand. Well, give Voyager a watch. I think it's enjoyable enough that I think people should definitely watch as we're going through all these Star Trek iterations.
Yeah,
that's the word I'm looking for. Iterations.
Yeah, that's a good word for that.
I think it's one that you should definitely take a watch through.
Well, the next one we do is going to be on Enterprise.
Yay.
See, I love Enterprise. I think Enterprise is great.
Hated Enterprise, and I dumped out early on that one, and I know about the final episode, and just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
blah.
I'm not crazy about the final episode of Enterprise either.
No. So, all right, with that then, I guess we will step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Wikipedia, Mysterious Universe, the Akron Beacon Journal, and the Generation Y podcast. And this episode is about Dr. No.
Dr. No.
Dr. No.
Oh, not Dr. No.
Not the James Bond Dr. No. Dr. No is the nickname given to a suspected American serial killer thought to be responsible for the murders of at least 9 women and girls in Ohio between 1981 and 2004.
Good God, how come I've never heard of this?
Uh-huh. I've heard of this one several times. As victims, he primarily chose prostitutes working in parking lots and truck stops located along Interstate 71. There are suspicions he committed 3 similar killings in New York, Illinois, and Pennsylvania between 1986 and 1988. So before mobile phones, truckers and prostitutes communicated by CB radios.
Yes.
Dr. No
lizards.
Yes, and Dr. No could be heard on public CB chatter trying to call prostitutes to his truck. Investigators at the time said they looked into it and found several truckers using the nickname Dr. No. By 1991, there were at least 9 prostitute slayings that appeared to be connected in Ohio, and investigators from different parts of the state formed a task force that was led by the Medina County Sheriff's Office. Some of the victims were prostitutes at the Union 676 truck stop in Austintown, which is east of Akron and west of Youngstown, which is the largest in Ohio, leading investigators to suspect that the killer was a truck driver. Most victims were found without underwear or shoes. The killings began in 1981 when the body of a young woman was found in Miami County, Florida on April 24th. After forensics examination, it was determined the victim died from strangulation, having received a head injury beforehand. At the time of her discovery, no personal belongings or documents were found, making her identification difficult. She was well groomed and there was no evidence of sexual assault, and investigators did not characterize her originally as a prostitute. She was nicknamed Buckskin Girl from the tasseled buckskin poncho she was wearing, and in 2018, the victim was finally identified as Marcia King.
Oh, wow.
The next victim was 25-year-old Marcia Matthews, who was found beaten but barely alive on June 16, 1985, by a trucker 1 mile away from the Union 76 truck stop. She died 2.5 days later from a traumatic brain injury sustained after beating with a blunt object. On July 20th, 1986, the body of 23-year-old prostitute Shirley Dean Taylor was discovered, who was also beaten and strangled to death. Before her disappearance, she was seen at the Union 76 truck stop where, according to witness reports, she went to meet a regular client nicknamed Dr. No, whose identity was never established. Her body was discovered a few miles from the place for disappearance with her underwear and shoes missing. In December of 1986, 18-year-old prostitute April Barnett also went missing from the Union 76 truck stop, with her body found only a few days later, 70 miles from Austintown. As with the previous cases, she had been beaten and strangled to death, with some of her clothes missing as well. A few days later, 28-year-old prostitute Jill Allen was found murdered in Illinois near Interstate 70. Despite the fact that she had been found in another state, she was deemed a victim of the same killer due to the modus operandi. She had been beaten and asphyxiated with strangulation marks found on her neck. Her shoes, bra, and underwear were never found. The next victim was 27-year-old Anne Marie Patterson, who went missing on February 7, 1987 from the Union 76 Austintown. Anne Marie was being dropped off for work by her husband at a truck stop, and she and her husband heard a call coming in from the CB from Dr. No. She declined the call, saying she knew of him, but she was dropped off anyway. Her semi-decomposed body was found 40 days later, 250 miles away from Austintown near Cincinnati. A week before the disappearance, she had been arrested by the police, and at the police station, she gave information about a murder suspect and described his car. During the investigation, law enforcement agencies discovered that Patterson had made an appointment via CB radio with the client nicknamed Dr. No, whom she characterized as extremely negatively, and then disappeared. From this, the police and later the media used the nickname for the unidentified criminal. On August 10, 1987, another victim's body was found in Inglewood. The victim's jeans and underwear were at her ankles, while the upper parts of the clothes were missing. According to the nature of the grass depressions and the tire tracks located at the scene, forensics experts determined that the killer threw the victim's corpse out of his car. An autopsy later revealed that the victim was a young woman aged 20 to 25 and died from strangulation. And despite the abundance of tattoos on her body as well as jewelry the offender had not stolen, she remained identified until 2010, when she was identified as Paula Beverly Davis, who was 21 at the time, after relatives recognized her tattoos pictured from her listing in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Although she was included on the task force relating to the murders that was formed in 1991, additional theories suggested that a drug dealer's retaliation, an unknown woman had last seen in her company, or an unrelated serial killer. On November 22, 1987, the body of 19-year-old LaMonica Cole was discovered at a truck stop in Breezewood, Pennsylvania. And despite the fact that the truck stop was located on another interstate, Cole was included as a potential victim because she had died of strangulation, was a native of Ohio, and some of her things had been recovered while others had not.
He's keeping trophies.
Uh-huh. That's exactly what I think. He's keeping trophies on this.
Uh-huh.
During the investigation, LaMonica's pimp, 24-year-old Derek Mims, told police that the alleged killer whom Cole left with on the day of her disappearance was traveling in a blue semi-trailer truck with white stripes. 31-year-old Terry Rourke was murdered March 29, 1988 in New York, her body found on one of the bridges passing through the Mohawk River. The medical examiner found that the woman died from a traumatic brain injury that occurred during a beating with a blunt object several hours before the discovery of her body. Some of Rourke's clothing, including underwear and shoes, were never found, leading investigators to include her in the list of potential victims of Dr. No. Again, trophies that he's keeping.
Mm-hmm.
On April 19, 1990, another female body was found near a truck stop on the I-70. Most of her clothes were missing, although her panties remained. An autopsy concluded she had died from traumatic brain injury resulting from a beating and had sexual intercourse 12 to 24 hours before her death. With these conclusions, the investigators suggested that the victim was a prostitute and had fallen victim to the serial killer. Despite multiple attempts to identify her, she remained unidentified, with the placeholder Jane Doe 2 until her identification as Patrice Anita Corley, who was 29 years old, in 2017. She was 29 at the time of her murder. During the course of the investigation, the police interviewed hundreds of prostitute pimps, service station employees, and truck drivers in an attempt to find witnesses and identify the offender. According to the witnesses, the killer appeared to be a tall, large man with fair skin and dark hair, aged 25 to 40, wore glasses, and talked with an accent matching that of someone from the northeastern states. The vehicle he was driving was described as a 1984 silver truck with a wind blocker and a red hood. The Ohio State Police Department and volunteers from various civil society organizations posted over 4,000 photographs of the victims and an identikit of the offender at 130 truck stops and service stations across the state and 1,350 truck stops in 9 other states through which the interstate motorways which the serial killer would ride through, offering $10,000 for information about him. As a result, 5 people were detained who at different times were nicknamed Dr. Who, but subsequently no charges were filed against any of them, and their names were never disclosed to the public. On most of the corpses, biological traces were discovered that, according to investigators, came from the perpetrator. To establish if the sperm had the same affiliation, a forensics examination was carried out which gave mixed results due to the fact that all the victims had engaged in prostitution during life, and authorities started questioning whether the deaths were actually related. Since no other incriminating evidence was found at the crime scene, such as fingerprints, hair samples, and pieces of clothing, the investigation to this day hasn't established the killer's identity. In April of 1991, a resident of Lake County, Ohio, 36-year-old Alvin Wilson became a suspect. Wilson, who had worked as a trucker and owned 2 tractors, was amongst those whose hair samples matched those found on the victims. Credit card receipts and other evidence indicated this possible responsibility for the Ohio murders. And in 1990, he was arrested on charges of assault and attempted murder of a woman in October of 1989. After his arrest, the girl contacted the police, stating that in 1986, Wilson had picked her up in Akron after paying for her services, and he had beat and attempted to strangle her afterwards. Wilson was tested for any involvement, but the results were inconclusive. That same year, a long-haul trucker driver named John Fattenberry was arrested for several murders committed across 4 states. He was briefly considered a suspect in the killings, but was later ruled out as his modus operandi and the victim profile were too different. In June of 1994, a 36-year-old trucker from Ohio, James Robert Cruz Jr., was convicted in the March 1993 murder of 17-year-old Dawn Marie Birnbaum in Center County, Pennsylvania, whose body was found along Interstate 80. The girl's body was discovered a few days after her death, and since most of her clothes were missing, Cruz was considered a possible suspect in the Ohio killings. He was tested, but subsequently no charges were filed against him concerning the other murders. In 1995, 28-year-old Sean Patrick Goebel, who was a trucker from North Carolina who had admitted to killing 2 prostitutes in Tennessee in April of that year, was among the suspects for the murder of a North Carolina woman in early 95. As a trucker, Goebel traveled to several dozen states across the county where cases of disappearances and murders of prostitutes along interstate highways were recorded. Following his arrest, Goebel was investigated for murders in at least 10 states. Nevertheless, he was cleared of suspicion for being the elusive Dr. No, since at the time of the first murder in 1981, he was still in high school, and in the mid-1980s, when the majority of the killings took place, he was serving in the Army and was stationed outside of Ohio. In November of 2005, on the basis of DNA profiling, authorities arrested 46-year-old Delmas Colvin, who was a truck driver who killed 5 prostitutes in Toledo. Colvin later admitted to killing at least 2 others in New Jersey, but vehemently denied any involvement in the Dr. No murders during the 1980s. Then in early 2019, 49-year-old Samuel Legg was arrested in Arizona. Using DNA profiling, law enforcement agencies were able to prove his guilt in 4 murders in Ohio and Illinois, the first of which he committed at age 20 in 1989. His initial arrest was due to a match for an unsolved 1997 rape of a minor in Medina County, Ohio, where he was extradited to stand trial. In the fall of 1990, Legg was a suspect in the murder of his stepdaughter, 14-year-old Angela Hicks, in El Ria, but as there was not enough evidence, he was not charged. Due to mental issues, Samuel Legg was deemed unable to stand trial for his crimes and subsequently resides at Twin Valley Behavioral Health Center in Columbus, Ohio, which is a maximum security facility where he's been voluntarily committed and is not permitted to leave. In 2019, a judge gave prosecutors a 1-year deadline in which they are expected to restore Legg to competency so he can answer to his crimes. Oftentimes, he would be speaking at a fast pace and switching up topics mid-sentence and ended up residing in group homes for individuals with complex health needs. Police considered him a danger to himself due to his delusional behavior and the fact that he has heard voices in his head instructing him on what to do. Police had witnessed and recorded these encounters on several occasions. Legg has escaped from facilities multiple times and had always be found wandering alone. In one occasion, police stopped him and instructed him to contact his family, and in response, the man held up his right hand to his head and began holding a conversation with it as if it were a phone, seemingly convinced he was talking to another person. It was determined that he was suffering from neurosyphilis, which is a bacterial infection of the brain caused by an unrelated case of syphilis, as well as schizophrenia and delusions. And although police do not believe these murders are the work of just one individual, they believe his Legg is responsible for more murders than he has been accused of.
So the police are thinking it's maybe a group of people, maybe a group of predators working.
Yeah, they don't suspect. They don't have any one single suspect who they believe is the responsible for the murders. They think that there's multiple people who went by the name Dr. No. They have recordings of the CB conversations between several of the people. They sound very similar, but who knows at this point? I know at one point Samuel Legg was considered the most likely of the Dr. No suspects, but to this date, there's been no one person who has been convicted.
It sounds
for
like
this.
They convicted some guys about a whole bunch of other similar crimes. It almost sounds like there's a group of them out there hunting.
And I think there is. Either was or is. Who knows if there's still ones out there that are doing this. The last one they attributed to it was in 2004. So maybe they have everybody, maybe they don't. Maybe there was copycats out there. I think the copycats are the most likely one. I think people took advantage of this Dr. No persona and used it to prey on a very vulnerable level of society.
Yes. How unfortunate.
So that is my story for today.
Well, thank you, sir. That's interesting. I can't believe I'd never heard of that before.
Dr. No.
Dr. No.
It's real creepy. I should go out there and see if I can find some of the recordings of the CB talk. It's very creepy listening to it. So I'll see if I can find some of those. So with that takes us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find our information on nerderymurdery.com, where you can find the links to our contact information. If you want to reach out to us, let us know things you want to hear, let us know things you don't want to hear. Last week we did an episode of music from our fans, so please do continue to send that stuff in. We're very happy to cover that.
Yes, we also have a YouTube channel, Nerdery and Murdery, where we produce playlists and different videos of things we like, including a playlist for this episode this week. Give you a little bit of background information about it, theme songs. Occasionally we can even throw in a full episode if it's public domain. So we do as much as we can.
Yeah. Outstanding. Thank you for that. You can also find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing something from there. And if you wish to become one of our patrons, you can find the link to our Patreon, where if you want to help us keep going with this show, because it does cost to produce this show and put it on the air, please do consider being a patron. You get episodes early, plus you get exclusive episodes that are only available to our patrons.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And lastly, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It helps us and it helps others find our content that may not be previously aware of us. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.